Well, that didn't take long. Hello, everybody. David Shuster here. 2 months into office, and Donald Trump has set another record. He has the worst public approval rating in history for any president at this stage of a new administration. Intelligencer, Trump's approval rating goes underwater. Newsweek, Donald Trump approval rating goes negative for first time in presidency. Here's a graph of the 538 polling average. Disapprove 47.9, approve 47.6. Again, in the history of polling, no U.S. president has ever been underwater in public approval this early in a new administration. And there's more.
Brand new polling shows that a majority of Americans say the State of the Union is not very strong. A majority of Americans say the cuts to the federal government are doing more harm than good. Majority of Americans say Trump has not paid enough attention to the country's most important problems.
And the most important problem, according to the polling data, is the economy. Under Donald Trump, inflation is rising and consumer prices are going higher, not lower, as Trump had promised. And Americans do not see Donald Trump doing much to address all of that.
The economy is the number one issue. If that's what Americans think you should be prioritizing, and well less than half think that you are, no wonder Trump is having problems with the economy, because simply put, he's not putting it to the top of his list the way Americans are.
Now, I can already hear some of the Trumpsters out there saying, well, wait a second. These polls were conducted before the Trump speech to a joint session of Congress. Maybe Trump will get a bump. Maybe. But if past his prologue, it will not make much difference.
Because going back through history, the job approval shift post-speech to Congress, the average president goes up, get this, but just 0.3 points. Trump's average was up 1.6, but that was just a momentary bump. That really isn't going to change the game. Something's going to have to happen with him on the economy and perceptions of him and how he's dealing with the economy if he wants to see his approval rating go up instead of go down.
And the trend line is not going to get any better for Donald Trump, thanks to the latest report about U.S. employment layoffs. Headline, The Hill, job cuts last month higher than any February since 2009.
Announced layoff in February surging by 245% to the highest level since the pandemic, with the Trump administration's efforts to reduce the federal workforce playing not the only, but the biggest part in that. The outplacement firm Challenger Gray Christmas, they're saying that announced February layoffs, not actual layoffs, but announced ones, rose to 172,000, up from just 49,000 in January. It's the highest monthly number since July 2020, the worst February since 2009. It was a mix of layoffs from the government and the private sector.
A mix. In other words, the Trump government layoffs were just part of the jobs report. Private sector industries also cut jobs at an unusually high clip. Several corporate CEOs say the cutbacks were directly related to uncertainty over Trump tariffs, as well as the economic chaos that Donald Trump has inflicted. And the contrast between the Trump administration and the end of the Biden administration is stark.
We look at the trend here, you can see that these layoff announcements late last year were hovering around 50,000, 60,000, but there's been this notable spike up to 172,000 in February. Challenger, they've been tracking this monthly figure for 32 years, and there's only been 11 months over that span that had a higher number than this one, and John, all of them were during recessions.
So, is the United States now in a Trump recession? Well, to a lot of employers and their workers, it certainly feels that way. Investors are also in a bit of a panic, and that keeps showing up in the U.S. stock markets, which are now in the red since Donald Trump took office. That means the U.S. stock markets have lost value. It's a different story in Europe, where since Donald Trump took office, European stocks have gained value. The haphazard nature of Donald Trump's handling of the economy was on display even in the wake of his speech to Congress. In his speech, Trump insisted that U.S. automakers were so excited about their prospects amidst his new tariff regime. But in fact, the automakers were not excited in any positive sense. They were infuriated. And the day after the Trump speech, headline, Facing Market Pressure and GOP Pushback, Trump Delays Auto Tariffs.
This morning, President Trump giving automakers a temporary escape from his sweeping 25% tariffs on all goods from Mexico and Canada. After the CEOs of Ford, Stellantis, and General Motors called the president with a personal appeal, Trump agreeing to pause tariffs for 1 month on cars coming into the U.S.
The back and forth has disrupted global markets and has disrupted corporate planning. And keep in mind that since 2009, automotive manufacturing jobs in the United States have been rising. Under President Biden, the automotive sector hit a 34-year peak. Now, the industry, like many others, faces economic uncertainty and turmoil. That also describes the mood of many U.S. government workers and veterans. The Trump White House is now planning massive cuts to the Veterans Affairs Administration.
On that, the AP reports this, quote, the Department of Veterans Affairs is planning a reorganization that includes cutting more than 80,000 jobs. Wow, 80,000 jobs from the agency that provides health care for retired military members. The VA's chief of staff told top-level officials at the agency Tuesday that it had an objective to cut enough employees to return to 2019 staffing levels of just under 400,000.
Much of the increase under the Biden administration was due to a new federal law. The law required the VA to rectify staffing shortages and lengthy wait times for veterans seeking health care. Also, the new law required the VA to cover veterans exposed to toxic substances such as burn pits. The Trump White House says the VA will be better able to serve veterans if 15% of the VA staff is cut. Democrats, and more than a few Republicans, call that nonsense. And there are now growing fears across the VA community about longer wait times and less service. The Trump White House is also planning large cuts to the Social Security Administration. All of the government downsizing and workforce cuts are intended, if you believe Donald Trump, to save taxpayers money. However, there is an argument that Trump squeezing the government budgets is being done in order to pay for his planned tax cuts for the wealthy. And now even parts of the Maga movement are breaking away from Donald Trump on his tax cut plans. Maga populists, including former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, are publicly speaking out.
I am not a fan of the corporate tax cut right now. The reason is they gamed the system last time. They didn't put in capital equipment. They didn't put in things to grow the economy. What did they do? Exactly what I said they were going to do. They went and put it in stock repurchases to drive up the price of their warrant and equity packages and made more money. And all those CEOs kind of skipped off, and the companies are where they are. I'm only corporate tax cuts if it's ironclad that they're going to take the tax cut, the savings, and plow it back into productive capital. Capital. You didn't see that. They took it for themselves. And I'm totally opposed to tax cuts for the rich. I'm just them. I can walk through any set of analysis that we just don't have the money, and the working class and middle class need it. This is why there's so many MAGA people. There's so many folks on Medicaid. They don't want to be on Medicaid. Nobody wants to be on Medicaid. They have to be on Medicaid.
But Trump Republicans in Congress are trying to cut Medicaid as well. You can see where all of this is going. Donald Trump's popularity is plummeting. Independent Americans who voted for him in the last election and were willing to give him some time in office have now had enough. And Republican lawmakers at public events are getting an earful about the economy and about the government cuts.
In those programs
That was Texas Republican Congressman Keith Self. His district is Trump red, or at least it was in the last election. Now, in Republican districts and Democratic districts, Americans are expressing anger and exasperation. And when asked by pollsters about Donald Trump, a majority of Americans now disapprove. That has never happened before to any U.S. president this early in a new administration. And there's no indication that Donald Trump's fortunes are about to turn around. There is every expectation, according to analysts in both parties, that the Trump numbers are going to keep dropping, given that the economic reports are now on a trend line to get even worse. By the way, the lone liberal on the Fox show The Five, Jessica Tarlov, recently decimated conservative host Jeanine Pirro over the Trump GOP defense of Russia.
Every decade, they've moved closer and closer to Russia, NATO has. And the Crimea and everything else is a response to NATO.
Russia. NATO encroaching on them.
They are an independent country who believes strong. And I'm not pro-Russia at all.
Really? It doesn't sound like that.
Don't give me that,
You
really.
Don't give me that.
Don't give me that. You know what? The truth is, they stand for this, and they don't want NATO any closer. And it's been decades that that's been agreed to.
They
And for
invaded a
decades, they've
sovereign
been closer.
nation and
Do you remember 3 years ago?
They've stolen their children.
Okay, 3 years ago.
1 second, Jessica.
Check out that video at the link below. It generated a lot of comments on YouTube. One of the wittiest is from Stephen, who wrote, Pirro is just pissed because of the alcohol tariffs. Well played. I look forward to reading your comments about Donald Trump's approval ratings plunging below water. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.